see kind of that tug of war when a government gets too separated from the people. And whether it's through taxes or through it's primarily through taxes, like we're talking about, where there's just that tension where the cost of living is too great, because not only is the government taxing the people right out of the gate, but then also they're printing more money, causing inflation, meaning that things are more expensive to buy as well. So it's like you know the thread is being burnt from both ends. And if the government can maintain that balance where they're able to still like that from both ends, but not get the people upset enough to where they're pulling out the guillotines,
Right.
then things are good. And I mean, they're good for the government. They're not
Right,
good
right.
for
Yes,
the people,
yes. Yeah.
not good for the people.
Right. Yeah.
And we're coming into a very interesting time where you can see now firsthand. I mean, you and I were a couple of peasants in the United States, and we can get firsthand account of what politicians are doing allegedly around the world, right? We're not having to rely on our neighbor 3 miles away on a local farm that tells us some news that happened 6 months ago. We're getting
Mhm.
instant, real time information. And it's harder then for a lot of these governments to hide that level of corruption. And either we're getting into a particular point where the the institutions that control the levers of information are going to have to really crack down a little harder to ensure that people aren't privy to a lot of the information. Like, they don't want a lot of this Epstein stuff coming out, right? They don't want people to understand a lot of this stuff. So as things become, as the veil is lifting and as things become a little more transparent, just as a byproduct of the information that's becoming more freely available, there's going to have to be a clamping down, because otherwise people are going to get too restless with a lot of the stuff that's going on. See, you can't even necessarily get people to buy into wars anymore, right? It doesn't necessarily, like, unless you paint like a Thanos level villain or something
Mhm.
to the American people, to get them to go do something. Like, you're not gonna get anybody. Like, people are too busy watching TikToks and eating cheese puffs,
Right.
to get them to do it. And there's also a level of and I don't mean to say, like, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but I guess if there was any benefit of something like nihilism, right, it would be that people aren't even interested in war. Like, you're not even getting the average Gen Z or nihilistic millennial to get up and do anything. So I guess it's kind of some sick byproduct of it. You're not getting
Mhm.
a bunch of young people gung ho about murdering other people for governmental cause. And so I just kind of wanted to leave it with that. I wanted to get your view on that, on kind of like the orchestration that a government needs to play depending upon the era, the time, the society. Like, there's so many different variables, and
Yeah.
it's a balancing act to where they appear benevolent, they appear like Santa Claus, and the last thing they want to do is to get people to realize that Santa Claus doesn't exist, that actually the people in charge are quite malevolent.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So at the beginning, you were talking about that satiation, and I was kind of talking about the positive side of satiation in terms of fulfillment. But you're talking about like a short-term satiation where behind the screens, there's this greater order of um, usury going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get the Grand Theft Auto, you get the movies, whatever it is, and that allows you in the moment to overlook the big things going on. Whereas the ideal balance between the government and the people would be where that satiation is not just momentary, but is actually fulfilling and sustainable going on into the future.
Yes.
Not just distracting you from the moment when you know there's this big flashy thing that you got to deal with. And you're right about the different ages and different time periods. I was just reading and while you're talking and thinking about in Aristotle, he talks about how tyrannies were more prevalent in rural areas in his time, rural kingdoms, than in cities. Now, that might some people might think that sounds a little odd because, well, today it seems like cities are more on board with more draconian measures, and rural people are more like, no, leave us alone. But it makes sense from that idea of information of back before we had the media, before we had developed ideas of individual sovereignty and whatnot. When you just had a ruler in charge of people, okay, if they're all a bunch clumped together and they can communicate quickly, that does provide more of a buffer against their power versus when everybody's spread out. And like you said, they're getting their news much later, infrequently. Then it's going to be a lot easier to control them all because they can't really get together as easy. So that's something that's changed over the ages. Um, but in terms of the other side of that, like a good government. This is the philosophy that's coming out of Confucianism and ancient China. It says, on the whole, states that were well governed by reasonably compassionate, dynamic rulers enjoyed much greater support and even enthusiastic commitment from both the populace and the officials. Their people went forth into battle ungrudgingly, that's something you were talking about, with determination and intensity, unified and disciplined in defense of their interests. In contrast, under corrupt and extravagant rulers, the people began military campaigns already wearied and exhausted, and could only grow more dispirited and filled with rancor, even if initially motivated by national antagonisms to fight the enemy. So that's the thing. We can paint as big a monster as we want, but I mean, the art of war says over and over, prolonged warfare is not a good thing. It does not help the state. It innervates society. You need to avoid it. You need to let the people recoup. You need to make sure that you're not taxing them and draining them too much. And that's just the basic overview. If you're doing well, legitimately doing well by the people, they'll notice and they'll be happier and they'll trust you and they'll be usable in a battle when you need it. But when you're just going to go to battle and you're not, it doesn't seem to impact or care for the people, then yeah, people will get nihilistic, as you said. And then even the carrots don't work anymore because, you know. So another thing it says here, uh, following on that, the focus of all grand strategy must be the development of a prosperous, contented populace whose willing allegiance to their ruler is unquestioned. So again, if even if you want to be like the super tyrant kind of guy of like I'm in control and I get to do the things and I get to go to war, okay, but the best way to do that is to have your populace be contented and prosperous so that they can provide for that and so that they like you and listen to you. And again, that's something Aristotle says. He's like, one of the best ways to continue being a tyrant is to not be so much of a tyrant. Like, don't be just ridiculous about it. Try to be at least appear kind of like a good king and take care of the people a little bit, and then you'll last longer. And this brings up what they call in again Chinese philosophy the essential problem of command, forging a clearly defined organization in control of thoroughly disciplined, well-ordered troops. The critical element is spirit, technically known as qi, the essential vital energy of life. So again, the focus is we want to be able to do battle. So therefore, we need people who are rested and prosperous and able to give that. And we need to be able to discipline them and order them without them feeling like, oh, this is too much and rebel. And they need to have this vital spirit. And all of that together, achieving that is contained within maintaining the Tao of the state. And again, that goes back to that first one I read, where the states are well governed, reasonably compassionate, and uh, making the people prosperous and contented, right? That's sort of the Tao in essence. So with that all being said, it says here in the history that does not mean that ancient China followed those rules more than anyone else. This is something that people have theoretically recognized for thousands of years, but in terms of practice, uh, mostly we've had bad kings remember tyrants a lot in the West, and same thing in China. They did not regularly have super virtuous kings, even though they had this philosophy that said, "Hey guys, this is the best way to do it." So, not trying to paint a rosy picture of history, but the wisdom, the ideas are there, and those are solid.